Okay, let's deal with this advanced shaft. So I've got the advanced shaft here, and I'm using some graphite grease here to lubricate this. I want to work that in. That's better. That's nice and smooth. I'll just run a bit onto the spring. That's good. Our take-up spool is here, and its metal bush is here. The bush goes in the plain hole, of course. This hole at the top engages with the mechanism at the top. So I'll put our take-up spool in place. Drop the film advanced shaft down through it. Now, by convention, the slot in this plate here always goes to the end of the camera. There are 3 small screws, countersunk head screws. That's good. Just make sure that that take-up spool sat correctly. It did. The other 2 screws. Just rotate that shaft out of position so I can get the screw in there. As usual, get all the screws in position, then go around and tighten them up. Now, here's our lock lever for the rewind button. I just put a smear of molybdenum paste on that top rounded edge. Just give it a wipe on the inside. Any lubricant would have done for that. The spring for that is this beastie. The screw for that is a stepped screw. Here it is. I carefully line these parts up, but I still can't find things when I want them. Make sure that's sitting correctly, that the lever can rotate smoothly. Make sure that screw's done up tight, because as I recall it was not done up tight when I started. Now I've got to get the spring correctly positioned. So lift it up over the tab there, and on the other side of this lever. That's it. That's in position. Right, the film sprocket. Here's our sprocket. That goes in position in the body. And we have the sprocket shaft. Lubricate this with a wipe of synthetic grease where it runs through the body, top and bottom. Usually I'll apply a little touch to that gear at the top too, just so it'll revolve smoothly. This drops down here. If I can get my sprocket correctly aligned. That's better. Flip it over. Make sure that lines up with the hole in the casting. There we go, that's up. Now, pull back our lever to allow the sprocket shaft to come all the way to the top. I'm just closing the front of the camera so I can lay it flat. I'm going to rotate the sprocket shaft to bring the hole in it up to the top where I can get at it. And we have one small screw there that goes in place. That screw couples the action of the sprocket shaft to the sprocket. So when one rotates, obviously the other must rotate. At the base of the camera again, we have a washer there. See if I can put this up on a block of wood so it's not falling over. We want our rewind button and the rewind button return spring. There's our return spring and there's our button. The return spring I normally lubricate with a wipe of synthetic grease. Put the button through it, and that screws into the end of the sprocket shaft. If it doesn't line up correctly with the washer, of course, it won't press into place correctly, so I've got to fiddle with that and get that correct. That's it, I just felt it drop into position. And I've got my pliers here. I'll just nip that up. You can see the button rotating on the bottom of the sprocket shaft there. We're just about done at the base of the camera, that can be closed up. So we've got our tripod socket. It's held in place with 3 screws. Typically these will come back even after they've been through the cleaning process. There'll be the remains of some adhesive on them. As it happens, 2 of these cleaned up pretty much completely. One of them shows a trace of black adhesive there. Get them in place and tighten them up. Here's the little shield that goes around the rewind button, and that's job is to stop you depressing the rewind button accidentally. And it's pretty efficient at that because it's not particularly easy to press in the rewind button. You normally have to do it with the end of a fingernail. That's all in, it's all in place, that's done. We're done at the bottom of the camera, and I can glue this leather back in position. So, taking some adhesive, just run some onto the leather. And then I've got to spread that out evenly with a toothpick so I get good even cover right to the edges, and I don't want any puddles of it glue anywhere. So right under those loose edges there. That should do it. Stretch that out. Lay the leather into place. Make sure it's fitted neatly around the shroud, around that rewind button for example. Tuck down into the recess in the bottom of the body. And tuck down smoothly around the button here at this end. If everything goes smoothly, you'll end up with leather that looks like it's never been disturbed. I can see there's a bit, it's a bit less than flat at this stage, and that will be because the leather's slightly stretched. It's stretched when I've peeled it back off the body, and probably it's because at these points it's quite narrow, and so the leather is just stretched at those points while I've been peeling it back. I don't think that'll be a problem for us. I think that'll look fine. And there are two small screws that hold this little trim in place. Some of the early Retinas just had a very narrow boss at this place for the tripod socket. This trim just provides a broader surface so that the tripod, it tightens up against the head of a tripod a little bit firmer. There we go, that's the bottom of our camera dealt with. At the top of the camera, well, we can do the rewind, I suppose. So I need the bush and the two parts of the shaft. Just make sure that there's no moisture in there. Some synthetic grease around the inside of the bush. Some synthetic grease around the outside of the inner portion of the rewind shaft. There's a little spring on that. It provides a degree of friction. Slide this into place, make sure it's the right way up. It's a bit reluctant to start. I'll just stretch the spring out very lightly with the tip of a screwdriver while I slide this in place. Get it started, that's it. Check that it runs smoothly. That's pretty good. You can go on the body, and that's held in place with two screws. Countersunk head screws, same size as held the tripod socket on the base of the camera. And typically you want prettier screws at this position than you did holding the tripod socket in, because no one ever sees those screws again once the trim and everything's in place. Everyone sees these screws if they take the top off the camera. So if you've managed to scar one of the screws up, make sure it's you use it in a place where it'll never be seen again. At this end we need the clutch. The clutch is 3 pieces, and basically it's a friction coupling between the inner and outer section. Typically I lubricate this with graphite grease because I like the degree of slippage it gives me. But I'll need another pair of pliers. That's these ones, which suit me just down to the ground for doing this job. So what I have to do, well, this spring fits onto the inner, and there's a little tab on the spring which drops into a slot. If I hold that gently in the crimp lug pliers, I can rotate it and that's pulled the spring in tight around the inside. It allows me to slide the outer piece on there, a bit like a ring compressor on a motorbike, I suppose, when you're putting your motors back together. There we have it. So that gives us some controlled slippage. Now these clutches are always stiffer in one direction than the other. Don't worry about that. The direction that it moves easier in is the direction it needs to move anyway. It's not required to move the other way. So I'll put a little bit of synthetic lubricant on that where it runs over the shaft. Make sure it drops into the top of the film take-up spool. And here, this is our top bush, and it's got 2 gear sets on it. Now I'm just going to lubricate those. That one there feels a little bit stiff. These will be quite dry, of course, because they've been through the degreaser and any lubricant has been washed out. That's good. A wipe down the inside where the shaft runs through it. That can be popped into position. Now if I rotate the sprocket and the take-up spool, you'll see that they're engaged nicely with the gears there. So those are properly engaged. And there are 3 screws hold this assembly to the top of the camera body. Again, they're the same size as the screws on the rewind bush and the tripod socket. Before I tighten those up, just check that things revolve smoothly. Tighten those 3 screws up. Now I've got to assemble the rest of the advanced mechanism. So, start with this piece. I'm just going to wipe the bottom of that with a bit of synthetic grease and wipe the inside with some synthetic grease. Now this couples the sprocket shaft and the take-up spool together. I'm just checking that they revolve around smoothly. They should do. That's good. This piece goes on there. There's a light spring that goes on at this point. Check that that's good. Whoops. And then this piece goes on. Just give that a very gentle wipe with a bit of lubricant. Now I know from experience that if I start it at about this position, it should give me good tension on the film advance back to the park position. I'll just run that into position, that's good. Right, there's that spring, return spring for the latch. This is the latch that holds the, it's a ratchet really. It makes sure that you can only rotate the film advance lever in the advance direction until it's cocked, and then it allows you to reverse and go back the other way. And in neither case can you get halfway and decide to have a change of heart. You've got to complete the action. And this piece goes on the top, and it seems to be a bit reluctant to go around there. And it's like picked up a bit of grit or something, but it might just be a bit dry. It's certainly moving smoothly enough now. That holds this lever down so it can't escape. And this is held in place with 3 screws, 2 plain screws, one at the end here, Just run that down loosely. One at the back here, it's a bit awkward to get at. It's not picking up, is it? Not all the way across. No, it's not. Hang on. That screw started in the hole. Of course it doesn't want to go. Let's try that. Let's run that down lightly, run that one down lightly, and we have a return spring here, and a shoulder screw. Oh, I can see I've left something out too. We'll be back up on this slightly. Let's take that off. I haven't got my ratchet in position. Going too fast. Shouldn't be talking to you people. Makes me forget stuff. Take that out temporarily. Little ratchet goes in here, ratchet pull. Right, get this spring hooked into position. Yeah, that action's working nicely. It's exactly as it should be. Get this back in position. This is our 8th day here of lockdown. I know that a lot of the rest of you are under lockdowns of one sort or another, and or shelter in place. I know that's a term that's used a lot in the States. And I'm sure some of you have been in lockdown a lot longer than 8 days so far. That's good. Those two are in position. We get this spring into position. It sits there. And the shouldered screw fits here, holds the spring in position and also holds the bracket down, of course. Right, those 3 screws are in position. I'll do them up tight. This one, of course, was loose when we started. And the spring. Hold down this lever, lift the spring up over the top and behind that lever, and that's good. That's providing the appropriate tension. The gear goes on the top and couples the shaft to this piece. And next I'll be wanting to tension this so that I can get the cocking rack in position. So first I've got to get this where I want it to start. Yeah, I want it to start right there. I want that to be the start of the cocking stroke. Push down this button, swing that round. I'm going to apply some synthetic grease to the cocking rack. Now the cocking racks in the Retina 1A and 2A models are very robust. There's never been a problem with them. Get that right round till the pull pops back up, and I can work that in to get that to connect. Is it connecting? What's happening here? Well, is that not right? That's better. That's just the right position. That was lucky. Okay, so we have our film advance effectively back together. You can see I've swung it round until the advance lever's at 90 degrees. It can just sit there now until I put the top cover on. Now this battery's going flat, I'm going to have to change it. Right, let's get this film, the shutter release in place. Put a little smear of grease around there, synthetic grease, mostly so it holds this collar in place. A bit of molybdenum paste around the casting there and there. Some down the centre of the shaft of the shutter release. Put the return spring in place, and this drops into place here, and it has to pick up the shaft inside here, so I'm just having to look down there and see if I can line that up. That's it. Okay. Now I can just about put the top on this camera really. If I put the return spring in there for the film release button, put the shutter release button on there. Hang on, I'll go and shut up that noise.
Oh, nice. Oh. So.
Okay, what have I got in here? Well, the shutter release button, that's what needs to go on there. And then the top cover can go in place, which is freshly cleaned and ready to go. 2 chrome screws hold the top cover in place. Our film advance lever goes on here. Now I left that mechanism 90 degrees around so it's easy to assemble. frame counter spring or pawl sits in there. I'll assemble these other pieces of the frame counter. Normally I use a little bit of synthetic grease to keep these pieces stuck together. You can assembly grease, you can call it. Hold those two pieces together, and the disc with the numbers on it goes on there too. Now this has to go in the correct position. Now there's always a scratch across this piece that points towards the number 1 position. If you put this on the wrong way, your frame counter will lock at number 21 or whatever it is instead of number 1. There's that piece. Now we've got our wavy washer that goes underneath. I'll wipe some grease on that, and that fits on here. And I'll rotate the frame counter clockwise until I hear it click in to position. That means it's picked up the tab that locks the film advance when you get to number 1. Means that's connected. And I'll just run that round lightly again to make sure it's correct before I nip this up. Check the action of the film advance. That's all good. The rewind, I can pop the rewind on, I suppose. I put the collar on the top. Put the knob in place. Put something through the fork to stop it turning. Check that works, that's all good. So there's our body done. And I can put the shutter back in place. So where's our shutter? It's sitting here. Just remove the retainer ring, drop that into place, and move the film advance. Now the film advance, that completed its stroke, but the shutter wouldn't fire. So the timing's not quite right, so I want to advance the timing by moving this cam forward a tooth. So I lift the shutter out slightly, move that cam forward this way, clockwise to my left there, and try again. And it still doesn't cock. So another tooth. Make sure the shutter's seated correctly in its place. That's nearly cocked. One more tooth, I think. Now my film advance won't complete. So I've gone one tooth too far, so I've got to back that off. There you go. Film advance complete. Shutter cocks and fires. Now I've got to test this on the 500th of a second speed because that's when there's most tension in the system, and if it's not quite cocking, it'll be there. That's working fine. So I can put the retainer ring in place. Now the retainer ring on the Retina Ia is a bit awkward to actually tighten with a tool like this, because on a Retina 2C or 3C or 2A This tool is guided by the rear component of the lens, but here it's not, so it tends to only just engage with the slots and slip out if you're not looking. That's just finger tight. That's good. Check that B works. That's good. Check that a tenth of a second sounds appropriate. Yes, it does. I'll tighten that and I'll check that the focus is correct, that an image correctly focuses at the film plane when the lens is set to infinity. And assuming that's the case, we're done. Back shortly. Well, that came as no great surprise. The focus is great, no problem there at all. So everything's nice and smooth now. Focus is good, controlled, nice smooth action. Lens, of course, is nice and clear. That had some haze in it. That was in the inside of the front group. Everything else is just great. Shutter's working correctly at all speeds. Film advance works nicely. Frame count is good. Job done. Thanks for watching.